Did Sean Manaea and Edwin Diaz just show us that the New York Mets have enough top flight pitching? I'll talk about that and more on today's show.
You are Locked On Mets, your daily New York Mets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello to all you amazing Mets fans. You're watching Locked On Mets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Ryan Finkelstein. If you want to find any of my work, follow me on X at Finkelstein Ryan. You can also find some of my writing at justbaseball.com, where I work as the managing editor. This episode is brought to you by Prize Picks, the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnMLB and use the code, all in lowercase, LockedOnMLB for a first deposit match up to $100. So after the trade deadline, there was sure to be a lot of questions about the moves the Mets made. And I did talk about all of them on a post-deadline live stream on YouTube. You can still find that on our YouTube channel. I did post it to your podcast feeds where I broke down each individual trade. Now, the Mets at this deadline, they made a lot of good moves. And again, we'll talk about that a little bit more later, but there still was a question, and there still is a question, about the top-end talent of the Mets pitching staff, the presence of enough lockdown relievers, and having the type of pitchers you want to hand the ball to in a playoff game. Well, it's one game, but Sean Manaea and Edwin Diaz bookended a shutout that, to me, promised that the Mets might just have enough in-house, right? And particularly looking at Manaea, because if you wanted to know who's going to start a playoff game prior to this deadline, of course, we were dreaming of a Blake Snell, or maybe the Mets will get a Jack Flaherty or Garrett Crochet, all these big names that were in the market. They don't get any of them. They get Paul Blackburn. Now you got to wonder who's going to grab one of those starts outside of Luis Severino. And Sean Manaea is clearly the number 2 on this staff right now, if not the number 1 at times. I mean, he has had some of the best starts we have seen this year, and this might have been his best start yet. He was dominant, and this was a fun game to watch as it just cruised through. I mean, it was a little over 2 hours in, game's over. And Sean and I had a lot to do with that, particularly going through the heart of that Twins order, facing Byron Buxton, Royce Lewis, and Jose Miranda. Those guys came up to the plate 9 times. Royce Lewis walked once. The other 8 trips all ended in strikeouts, which is ridiculously impressive from Sean Manaea. He gave up 2 singles the entire game, walked 1, that walked to Lewis. Needed just 96 pitches to get through 7 innings, and he struck out 11. I mean, that right there is a dominant performance, and it does make you optimistic about what it would look like in a playoff game, because that Twins lineup is not bad, and particularly this year, they've been great against left-handed pitching. Didn't matter. Sean Manaea took the game plan that Jose Quintana sort of laid the blueprint on the night before. He was using his sweeper slider to get ahead in counts, to steal strikes, to put them away at times. The sinker, the two-seam, the fastball up in the zone that just completely can put guys away. It's a joy to watch Manaea when he's on and when he's not his own worst enemy, walking batters, getting to deep counts, nibbling. When he's attacking like that, he can be so effective, and the Mets need that out of him. Okay, there's no one else coming, right? The best you might get is Christian Scott coming off the IL or Kodai Senga in the playoffs. But here on forward, it is going to be Luis Severino and Sean Manaea as the big horses carrying this rotation, and Jose Quintana too. So those 3 veterans have to get the job done. I think this was a really good start, not just because of the performance, but the tone that it set, right? The Mets have enough in that dugout, and Manaea just showed you, all right, let's go out, let's play ball. 2 months left here, and I feel pretty confident that every 5th day when you get Manaea on the mound, you're going to have a good chance to win. So it was really fun to watch him pitch that way. The Mets didn't score a bunch in this game. Brandon Nimmo scored the first run. He drew a walk in the 4th inning. He then advanced to second on a balk, advanced to third on a wild pitch. JD Martinez cashed him in with a base hit. Then in the 5th inning, Mark Vientos hit a solo home run, his 15th of the season. That's all the Mets did. 5 hits on the game, 1 walk. Jesse Winker did get a knock. I was wrong about that one, folks. I'll say it again. When you look at the Mets deadline totality, pretty awesome that they were able to land a Winker and not just a bunch of bullpen arms and Paul Blackburn. That was a very nice little addition that the Mets made, especially when you talk about the cost of it. But the bottom line, again, from this game, you have Manaea carry you through 7. The Mets winning 2-0. Ryan Stanek comes on. Pete Alonso makes a terrible error to start off that 8th inning, fields the ball cleanly. All he has to do is make a good flip to Stanek, and he almost threw him out of the season because he made him try to jump and leap to make a catch. Awkward fall. Luckily, Stanek was fine, but that was just a brutal flip by Pete Alonso. That put Stanek in a pressure situation, got a fly out, walked the batter, got another fly out. With 2 runners on, Byron Buxton coming up, Carlos Mendoza was not messing around. He called on Edwin Diaz. Edwin Diaz had a long at-bat to Byron Buxton, was attacking with fastballs, ultimately got him to a 2-2 count, threw one slider out of the zone that Buxton spit on, went right back to it, a nastier one that Buxton could not hold off on a full count. He gets a huge strikeout to strand 2. Then he pitched a perfect 9th, 1-2-3, gets a strikeout to lead it off, then gets 2 quick outs. There you go. Edwin Diaz locks down another save, and he has been very good lately. Hasn't been talked about much, but Edwin Diaz has allowed just 1 run over his last 11 innings pitched. And in the month of July, he is 6 for 7 in save situations. And the save that he blew was that game against the Pirates where he blows the game in the 8th inning. I think it was either going for a 4-out save or a 5-out save. Gets the final outs of that inning, having just allowed the 1 run. Then the Pirates have Aroldis Chapman come on for the save. The Mets score 2 runs off of him, get a 3-2 lead, if I'm not mistaken. And then Edwin Diaz holds on and gets the win. So even though he blew a save there, he got the win, and he pitched a 9th inning with a 1-run lead and got the job done. So I'm going to count that. 7 for 7 in some ways at locking down Mets victories this month. That's a huge, huge piece to what the Mets have here. We've been talking about Edwin Diaz's importance the last 2 years when he was just gone in 2022, how much the Mets felt that loss. And then this year with the injury at first, the lack of performance prior to it, and then the suspension, there's been a lot of uncertainty in the back end of that bullpen. Well, now you're seeing Edwin Diaz look like Edwin Diaz, and that just sets the tone for everybody else in that bullpen. Yeah, they didn't go out and get Tanner Scott or Carlos Estevez or Kyle Finnegan, some of those closer types that were on the market. But you know what? They didn't need a closer type. They have Edwin Diaz. They need guys that can bridge the gap to him, and I think they did a good enough job getting that. So overall, this game to me, it was very indicative of the fact that this is a Mets team that has enough talent to make a run. There are other teams in this wildcard race that did some big things. The Padres are the main one. They sold a ton of prospects. What was it? 4 of their top 5 and 6 of their top 12. AJ Preller is always wheeling and dealing. You could say that he's dealing for his job right now because the seat's a little bit hot with the state of the franchise and how long he's had there and the change of ownership that Peter Seidler sadly passed away, and he was his biggest advocate. So you don't know how much time Preller has left in that position, but he probably would have operated like this 2 years ago anyway. He's always aggressive, but is that lockdown bullpen going to be enough to overcome their issues in their rotation? The fact that their lineup, I don't believe, is as good as the New York Mets lineup. I don't know. And you go down the line, the Cardinals, they added Eric Fetty. That was pretty much it. Tommy Pham hits a grand slam in his first game tonight. So that addition is boding well so far. But I still look at the other teams in this wildcard race, and I really do believe with the lineup that the Mets have constructed and how much they're able to just pile on runs at times with the bullpen and the starting rotation that doesn't look sexy on paper, but I think has enough talent in it to get the job done, at least in the regular season. I still believe after this deadline, the New York Mets are a playoff team, and now we're just going to watch it play out, which is the fun part. So I'm excited to be covering the rest of this journey with you this season, and we will talk a little bit about the deadline and what David Stearns had to say about the moves that he made in just a minute here. First, though, quick word from our sponsors. Today's episode is brought to you by Prize Picks. Prize Picks is the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Unlike other apps on Prize Picks, it's just you against the numbers. All you do is pick more or less on 2 to 6 player stat projections, and you watch the winnings roll in. Get in on the daily action with your friends and become part of the Prize Picks community today. You can now win up to 100 times your money on Prize Picks with as little as 4 correct picks. So you can turn $10 into $1,000. If you're looking for promotions, Prize Picks has got you covered every week. From lowering select player stat projections on Tuesdays to help your lineup hit, or getting your entry fees back if you have a losing lineup on Fridays. Prize Picks is there to help. Download the Prize Picks app today. Use the code LOCKEDONMLB for a first deposit match up to $100. That's code LOCKEDONMLB on Prize Picks for a first deposit match up to $100. Pick more, pick less. It's that easy with Prize Picks. If you're an everyday listener to the show, make sure you become a Locked On Mets insider. This is our texting service where you get updates from me anytime news breaks in the Mets. You can ask me questions anytime. You also will get the lineup graphics sent to your phone each day so you know who's in the starting lineup without ever having to go on social media. If you want to be a Locked On Mets insider, find the link in the episode description. Go to subtext.com/LockedOnMets. Now at 6:45, David Stearns hopped on and met with the New York Mets media. And I got to tell you what, he looked like a guy that had been through it because he had over the past week. I was right there with him, honestly. I was really feeling those vibes as I watched David Stearns because, man, I crashed tonight. I am the managing editor at justbaseball.com, and it's very hectic during the deadline. I'm not fielding phone calls, but as the trades circle in, I'm assigning articles to writers and coordinating the staff, and then I hopped on a 2-hour live stream for Just Baseball before then doing the one here with Locked On Mets. I really felt David Stearns, the energy he was giving off. I was right there on that level with him, burned out. And it's taken me a while to be just up and ready to go to record this show tonight. It's 1:32 now. I needed a little nap, man. I was exhausted. I hope David Stearns got one himself. Maybe he slept through the first 5 innings of the game and caught up with Manaea at the end of it. And, of course, his bullpen holding on strong. But going through what he said, I don't have 5 key takeaways like I've done in the past when Stearns talked. For me, it was just sort of a collection of sentences that I jotted down that I thought were interesting. First one, goal was to help the pen, he said, fortify the rotation, get a lefty bat. They had laid that out. You'd seen reports about that in the media. They checked all those boxes. Now, how well did they fortify the pen and the rotation? We'll learn that in the coming months. And they obviously got their lefty bat in Jesse Winker, but they were able to get everything that they required at this deadline. Despite the hefty prices that were out there, they didn't meet those crazy demands. They found the pieces in the market that were affordable to them, and they struck while the iron was hot on those type of deals. And I really credit them for that because, he talked about that as well. I said there was some pretty aggressive pricing this year, and he really talked about his philosophy. And I think that was interesting to learn more about, just that the Mets were in on every conversation. If Garrett Crochet's in the market, the Mets aren't going to just say, oh, well, we're not going to touch him. Like, they're going to make the phone calls. They're going to do their due diligence because that is a great way to learn about not only what else is out there, but what you have internally. He said there was, a lot of teams asking about their top prospects. He also said that they fielded a lot of calls on their rental players. Not that they put out any outgoing calls. He said they didn't do that. They didn't make any calls shopping a Sean Manaea or Jose Quintana, but teams are calling about it. And so you're able to get a sense of who's looking to do what, and you're able to piece everything together. That's what this guy does, and what that front office does. There's a lot of people in there that have to lay out the roadmap, take all the information they have, and try to put it all together. I don't know about you guys. I'm a Giants fan. You might see the flag behind me, the little banner there. And I've been locked into the Hard Knocks offseason. Going through and seeing, it's Tuesday. We got another episode, don't we? We're going to see the Malik Neighbors episode where they draft them officially. But it has been cool to see that behind the scenes look at Joe Shane and what he's been doing in that front office, or what he did this past offseason, and just see how much information goes into these decisions and how much of a game of cat and mouse it is. In the Hard Knocks, you saw at one point they were at some combine or something where there's a conversation with the Panthers GM about Brian Burns, and then that turns into a trade a couple months later. It's the same thing. Maybe the Mets swing a trade for Garrett Crochet in the offseason. At that time, maybe they're more comfortable dealing their top-end prospects for a Crochet after they watch him complete a full season. It's just interesting how these guys have to navigate their jobs, how many conversations you have to learn what's out there, and then to just do the best you can to predict the market. And I think when you see the moves that the Mets made, to me, it has to give you more confidence in David Stearns moving forward. You might not like that they didn't push all the chips in, that they weren't the AJ Preller Padres of this deadline going all in on this season. But then if you take a step back and you think about where this team is, what would Tanner Scott have done to have increased the Mets' chances that significantly. Yeah, maybe you win a game or two more, maybe. But if you end up out of the race at the end of the season and you traded Luisangel Acuna and Blade Tidwell for Tanner Scott, and now Tanner Scott's a free agent, that's a huge loss to the franchise. And I think if you understand where this team is right now as a franchise, they don't have a deep enough farm system to make trades and not feel it. The Orioles have that. So the Orioles were able to make that trade for Trevor Rogers today and give up Connor Norby and Kyle Stowers, two guys that I'd almost make that package very similar to Acuna being close to a Norby, and Beatty's probably better than a Kyle Stowers, but similar in the sense that it's a guy that's in AAA, performs well there, hasn't really put it together in the big leagues yet. So I think the Acuna Beatty package would be better than Stowers Norby, and the Marlins probably would have taken that over the Orioles package. But it's just evidence of how much you would have had to give up to get that perceived upgrade, and how much better is Trevor Rogers than Paul Blackburn. So, sort of taking that look now, you take a step back and you think about what the Mets did. They didn't lose any trade here. They didn't. And they checked everything on the market. They saw the price for certain pitchers that was just astronomical. And David Stearns was not going to make a really bad trade for a team that's not comfortably in a playoff position. He made, a comment about someone asked him about, building a playoff rotation or something along those lines. How do you feel about your team in a short series? It says a lot easier to make those decisions, to make those trades when you're the Phillies, because the Phillies are going to make the playoffs. It would take a historical collapse. It would never happen. Not in a million years. No chance in the world would the Phillies ever blow this lead. They just couldn't possibly. I'm trying to put the jinx out there, guys. We'll see if that works. Probably not. And that's the whole point. They have the team where they're going to be there. And so if they had made the big move to get a huge frontline pitcher, it would have made sense because they're going to be in the playoffs, so they'll have a playoff rotation. The Mets, you hope they're in the playoffs, but the last thing they needed to do was trade significant prospects for Jack Flaherty, and then all of a sudden Jack Flaherty comes over, gets hurt in his first three starts, and then the Mets failed to make the playoffs, and they gave up a ton of prospects for a guy that didn't have control. He mentioned that control was important, and outside of Jesse Winker and Ryan Stanek, all the other pieces have a level of control. Phil Maton, there's a club option. You look at the two relievers they got today, Huskar Brazaban and Tyler Zuber. They both have control and optionality, which he also mentioned was important. The roster flexibility. We'll talk about in the next segment where the Mets roster sits. They now have a stable of relief options that they can cycle through. So if they go to a 6-man rotation at some point, they'll have the arms that they can move in and out of that 7th spot of the bullpen to churn the roster whenever they need a fresh arm. If they just go with an 8-man bullpen, it's still the same thing. You have the options to do it because you picked up some relievers that you can send down, which does bring some value because the Mets, their best bullpen might just be what they had. Might just be getting Reed Garrett, Sean Reed-Foley, and Daniel Nunez back, plugging them in with Stanek and Maton, as well as, of course, Edwin Diaz and Jose Butto. That might be the pen. Speaking of Jose Butto, it does seem like the addition of Paul Blackburn will keep Butto in the rotation. David Stearns called him a Swiss Army knife, said that you can really use him in a lot of different ways. He said for the moment, Butto will stick in the bullpen. There's still some debate about what's going to happen with Tyler McGill, though we'll talk about that in the next segment. I'd imagine he's going to be the roster move to bring Paul Blackburn onto the active roster. But the bottom line here, the Mets got a lot deeper as a team. They have the depth now to make it through the final 2 months of the season. If one of their starters goes down, well, Tyler McGill can get called on again. If two of them go down, well, you got McGill, you got Butto. So getting Blackburn was a big addition to be able to just fortify that back end of the rotation. And when it comes to the playoffs, you just hope that maybe Kodai Senga can get better by then. And you would still have a Senga, Severino, Sean Manaea top 3 in a wildcard series. I think that's good enough, especially with the lines that the Mets have. Now, as it relates to the specific relievers he picked up, or even just all 3 pitchers, on Paul Blackburn, he just talked about consistency. how he's a throw everything, kitchen sink type of guy. He's got a 6-pitch mix. He's just a really solid arm. I watched some highlights of him. Very simple delivery. He likes his curveball a lot from what I saw in the few starts that I watched the highlights from. Doesn't throw very hard, but he can throw a 2-seam and kind of freeze a guy with his sinker. He's, has the ability to go to all 4 quadrants of the zone, has a cutter that he can throw. He's just got a lot that can work for him, and he pitches to contact. And the Mets defense, one of the quietest things about July, their defense has been on a different level lately. When you have Iglesias playing more at second base, the way Vientos has been very solid at third, having Lindor as a Gold Glover at short, and then an outfield where you have Bader out there and Nimmo. And look, even while I knock Jesse Winker's defense, I don't think he's going to be as bad as DJ Stewart was at times. And then you're also seeing the Mets really getting Tyrone Taylor in there in pretty much every game. So yeah, Jesse Winker is going to start, but Tyrone Taylor is going to be out there if the Mets have a lead in the final 3 innings, making sure that he's running down every fly ball in the gap. So I think Paul Blackburn is the type of pitcher that can really do well with a great defense behind him. And in those starts, because you might expect some extra fly balls, maybe you do start a Tyrone Taylor that day and give Jesse Winker a blow. I mean, that might be the time that you would make that type of a move. So I think this team got deeper. I think Blackburn was a very nice addition, quiet one, but when you consider the cost of other starting pitchers, I thought that was a really nice one. Then you look at the other comments that Stearns made on the relievers. As far as Brazoban, he said another sort of Swiss Army knife, a guy that can play, multiple different roles. He has gone for multiple innings for the Marlins this year. You could shorten him up, pitch him in leverage. Talked about a unique pitch mix. And yeah, just basically said the roster flexibility was important as well. This is a guy that you picked up who I think he's 34 years old, but he's got 1 year of service time. So you pretty much control the rest of his career in a weird way. And he's got 3 option years left. So this year is one of them. That means the next 2 years, you have a piece in your bullpen that you can go up and down with. That is really valuable. And I don't even feel like they gave it that much to get him. So very good move. Might be my favorite of the deadline, honestly, Brazoban. It's either him or Winker now, funny enough. But I really, the more that I chew on all these moves, the more I think I like them. And the bottom line through all of it, and I'm looking through, I don't think there's any other big comment that he made that stands out. He said there's rarely a clear-cut decision on these things, just talked about weighing all of his options. Bottom line to me with David Stearns, there's a reason why I said last year when he was hired around this time, a little bit after the deadline, I made the comment that David Stearns, being the president of baseball operations for the New York Mets, was the biggest acquisition of the Steve Cohen era, even bigger than that of Francisco Lindor. And I stand by that because it is a steady hand on the wheel. Billy Epler would not have run this deadline as well. Billy Epler might have tried to swing for the fences a little bit. He might have traded a ton for Trevor Rogers, for whatever pieces out there. And we saw how the Daniel Vogelbach trade worked. Tyler Naquin. There's a lot of bad deals at that 2022 deadline when the Mets are in position. Epler did a great job that year building the team through free agency, but that was spending Steve Cohen's money. Now you just see the way that the Mets are able to maneuver their roster, the fact that David Stearns isn't afraid to DFA anybody. So who knows? I mean, for all we know, one of these players that he picked up might get DFA'd at the end of August. Doesn't matter. It's about having options, being able to shuffle your roster, and always try to find a solution when there's a problem. And I think he did a great job giving his team all the resources they need to navigate these last 2 months of the season and get to the playoffs. And I guess that is the last comment that he said. There was all this talk, and I've hated it whenever I've seen it, that the goal was for this to be a bridge year. The goal is for the Mets to sell. And yeah, you could sit here now and say, oh, the Mets missed out on an opportunity to sell based on the prices that were out there for some of these guys. But he said that since the beginning, the stated goal for the Mets was to be a playoff team and that they put themselves in a position to do that. And so that was the goal they were following through with. The goal was never, oh, we're definitely going to sell. If they were in a position where the team wasn't good enough, of course they would have sold and they would have probably done very well. But they ended up in a spot where they're in a wild card position. And now they just got to go out and win the games to get there. And I feel very good about their chances to do that based on how they've played and even some of the additions that they made. But what does the roster look like after all these moves? We're going to talk about that in just a minute. First, though, another word from our sponsors. Today's episode is brought to you by Supply House. Get supplies from the site that's made for skilled trades, supplyhouse.com. Supplyhouse.com is a reliable way to order plumbing, HVAC, and electrical products online with their easy-to-use website, which is packed with helpful resources and the latest product info to help you get the job done right. Get expert support and industry-leading service from the friendliest folks in the business and talk to a real person every time. Pros in the skilled trades can get a competitive edge by joining Supply House's free Trade Master program, where every Trade Master gets access to a dedicated phone line, free shipping, and discounts on every order. Join the thousands of trade pros already benefiting from their free membership at supplyhouse.com/T-M and order plumbing, HVAC, and electrical supplies from anywhere with just a few clicks at supplyhouse.com. Stay up to date with all the latest in the world of sports by checking out Locked On Sports Today, streaming 24/7 on YouTube. All right, so what's the state of the roster after the trade deadline? First things first, what will the rotation be moving forward? Luis Severino is going to pitch the day game on Wednesday, and then you have an off day on Thursday. So the Mets have some time to make their decision on the rotation moving forward, and Paul Blackburn last pitched on the 26th. So he could start on Friday on 5 days rest. Could be the move. Now, Tyler McGill was supposed to start on Friday. I'd imagine that the Mets are going to option McGill and then add Blackburn to the roster in his spot. That's what I think is going to happen. Now, if they do that, their rotation will be Severino, Blackburn, Peterson, Quintana, and Manaea in that order. That's how they'd be lined up. With that said, that is 3 lefties in a row. If the Mets wanted to, they can start David Peterson on regular rest on Friday and then insert Paul Blackburn after that to split up those lefties if they so chose, or they could even kick the can down the road even further on Blackburn. They could go Peterson to Quintana, then Blackburn, and maybe give him some time to get acclimated. That's a decision they'll have to make once they get him in-house. Now, that's what's going to happen with the rotation. I'd be very surprised if they went with a 6-man rotation to keep McGill. I just can't see it. I think the value that the Mets starters bring right now is that ability to pitch every 5th day. I think that is actually a huge asset because it allows you to have an extra arm in the bullpen. And if those guys end up only going 5, which I think you certainly have the risk of that with a Blackburn, with a Peterson, with the Quintana, even Manaea at times, makes sense to not have a 6-man rotation. I just don't think you have 6 starters that are good enough to do that. So with that said, 8 spots in the bullpen. Edwin Diaz, Jose Butto, Phil Maton, Ryan Stanek. Those 4 are your leverage guys right now. Now, Adam Ottavino could be DFA'd at some point, but I don't expect it just yet. Alex Young has pitched great as a left-handed reliever for them. I think he holds on to a spot. So I believe that those 6 are going to be in the bullpen for now. So it comes down to a decision on Danny Young, who is coming off a good performance, 2 innings pitched, 5 strikeouts. Actually, his last 7 appearances have been pretty solid. Matt Gage, who was added to the roster. We haven't seen him yet. He replaced Jake Diekman. Felt like a placeholder. I'd imagine he goes down. And then it's the 2 new guys, Tyler Zuber and Huascar Brazaban. Now, I think Brazaban's going to be in this bullpen, so I'd pencil him in. Then it comes down to Danny Young. Do you want a second lefty? Do you want Tyler Zuber? I will note Danny Young has been optioned at least 3 times already. You get 5 options on a pitcher throughout a season with their option years before you have to designate them. So you still have a couple left. I do wonder if because of that, though, and because Young has thrown the ball a little bit better as of late and having a second lefty in their bullpen, maybe Zuber ends up in Syracuse. Get your eyes on him for a little bit. Get your own pitching coaches on him and see what you have. And then they could always add him back to the roster or add him to the roster, the active roster at some point later. You never know, though. If they love Zuber, and apparently they've been talking to the Rays about him for weeks, maybe it is just Zuber and Brazaban that enter the bullpen, and you have Diaz, Butto, Maton, Stanek, Ottavino, Alex Young, Tyler Zuber, and Brazaban. Now, other options on the Mets 40. You have Grant Hartwig, Eric Orzi. Those guys are still on the roster. Hartwig just started a rehab assignment. He had a knee injury. And then Shintaro Fujinami, not on the 40, he cleared waivers. So now he's right back in Syracuse, and he's still that option that you never know the Mets might call on if they can figure him out. So that is nice to still have in your back pocket. And then you have Nunez, Sean Reed-Foley, and Reed Garrett waiting in the wings. So when you count all of them up, there's 9 pitchers the Mets have right now that have optionality that the Mets can play with. So you have Diaz, Maton, Stanek, who are set, Ottavino as well, but I think he has a roster spot that could be in jeopardy at some point. Jose Butto technically has optionality too, but I think he's been so good that he has proven to be a big leaguer for the rest of this season. It just shows you, though, that the Mets have a really good stable that they can call on so they can cycle guys whenever someone's not performing. There's another guy that's in Syracuse that probably is, and you can mix and match. I really like just the collection of arms the Mets have. I do sort of understand if you feel that there's not the lockdown 8th inning guy or 7th inning guy right now, because the best you might have in that regard is Butto. But I think Phil Maton and Ryan Stanek at least have enough experience pitching and leverage that I feel comfortable with them. And I'm hoping that Daniel Nunez, Sean Reed-Foley, and Reed Garrett will be back and able to resume those positions as late inning, 7th, 8th inning guys that can pitch and leverage. I think the Mets didn't get that big name for their bullpen, but they have enough. And Brazoban is another guy who has a very good ERA this season and could pitch some quality innings for the Mets. So I like where they're at. Now, overall, grade on the deadline. It's hard to do that. I would say it depends on what you want to grade it on. Is it a curve based on how ridiculous the prices were on the market? Because in that sense, I might give the Mets an A, because they did not trade top prospects and they still addressed their needs. You look at what they gave up. Player to be named later or cash for Phil Maton, Ryland Thomas for Ryan Stanek, Tyler Stewart for Jesse Winker, Cade Morris for Paul Blackburn, Wilfredo Lara for, which one was he for? He was for Brazoban, and then Paul Gervais for Zuber. Gervais, minor league reliever for major league reliever. I don't think you lose sleep over it. Thomas, ceiling of a 4th outfielder. Lara, I honestly don't know much about him, but I do know he had a 692 OPS and high A, utility infielder. I look at all those pieces that went out. The only one that I'm a little upset about is Cade Morris for Paul Blackburn. But I think that Paul Blackburn was worth it to acquire. But for me, Cade Morris had the chance to be a big league starter, or has the chance. 3rd round pick last year, has put up good numbers in high A. But the cost of starting pitching was that. I mean, it was even more than that in a lot of cases. So I don't think that was a bad trade, but that's the one prospect I'm going to think about from this deadline. Tyler Stewart, too, solid prospect. But for me, Cade Morris is the one that I was a little bit like, man. But again, you got to get to get. So I look at what the Mets did at this trade deadline. I'm very happy with it ultimately. If you're not grading on that extreme curve of what everyone else did, I'd say it's probably like a B- deadline where the Mets just accomplished what they needed to. But it's a passing grade for sure. They did not fail the deadline. They did not mortgage their future. They did enough. And now they got, 2 months to make it happen. And I think the reality is the biggest strength of this team has been their lineup, and their best addition accented that with Jesse Winker. And so that lineup is better. That lineup has to carry the Mets the rest of the way. And if Francisco Lindor keeps playing like an MVP and you get a lot better performance from Pete Alonso on the stretch, as well as JD Martinez, Brandon Nimmo, you're already seeing Jeff McNeil swing it better. This lineup has everything they need to be a feared team in this wildcard race, and it's going to be fun to watch. So that's going to be all for today's edition of Locked On Mets. I appreciate all of you for tuning in. Tomorrow's show, we'll be breaking down the final game of this series. Might do some prospect-related stuff over the next couple of days. I still got to wrap my head around everything that just happened. But I appreciate all of you who tuned in today, who will continue to tune in. Make sure you follow, rate, and review wherever you get your podcasts. Again, thank you for making this a top 10 baseball podcast over the last couple of days. I really appreciate what everyone has done following the show throughout this entire process. If you're watching on YouTube, our goal is to get to 10,000 subs by the end of the season. So I appreciate all of you who've subscribed. And please subscribe if you haven't yet. You can follow me on X at Finkelstein Ryan. Follow the show at Locked On Mets. Thank you for making Locked On Mets your first listen every day. Now, for your second listen or your second watch, Head over to YouTube and check out the first ever 24/7 streaming channel that covers everything in the world of sports with our local experts from each team and our league-wide experts from each league. Find Locked On Sports Today streaming 24/7 on YouTube and on Amazon Fire TV.